course, it becomes like a crutch. And we pedal through life like an industry science to that sort of clutch theory where the bosses and the big people, or those minority groups that are too busy, separate in their own referential scale of will, take what sufficient evidence, entrapping us or trapping us to believe it and take that vast scale of maturity. You rely on the big bosses or those minority groups, but then they rely on you as much as they do as well. So like the competency level, and you wonder how businesses or proprietaries are supposed to expand, the willful engagement of people should somehow just sort of, be that vast exterior that, contrary to the pooled blank space modification of those in a much more, aligned scale of prediction, to put it at the forefront of the world's greatest challenges, especially those binding and coming together, at a global roundtable or a negotiation, to be able to scrutinise facts and be able to put it into a much more readily, fortified pathway of familiarity. The world plays no input, but to go ahead and make your bed and lay in it and saying that you've had no choice, take everybody for a ride. But nobody actually had no say in it. It seems almost like, contrary to public opinion and notoriety, if it had not sort of, put the mechanisms in play in order to show any real decent assessment or any real decent, I guess, understanding of something, or a conceptualized, take or run off of something, mankind in every facet would somehow consistently sort of lace their impulses with what we would know as karma. And it becomes more about the karma, and yet, like people with a lethal history, you're constantly doing it as a form of repetition in order to produce the very result of what you draw back on. And so what you very much, verifiably so, draw back on is that very non-substantiated degree of expertise and speciality that fails to compromise your barriers of resistance. It's actually, it's at the forefront of the imagination, let alone the forefront of importance, of most importance, relative importance to each and every one of us. Like people who would take the world like a fucking parasite, or take the entire earth as a satellite, or as a rubbish bin, and just destroy it because that's how they tend to like to do the laundry, or do the cleaning, or the rubbish dumping. You'll be dumped your problems at a very young age during teenage life, like pregnancy. And to be responsible for having to look after rubbish, or be responsible for such a great big responsibility that you think that a 16-year-old would not be, I guess, competent or fit to be able to meet that great big challenge. People like to say, we are the world, babies are the world. But again, human beings are willful above all things, and desperately wicked, where you can actually somehow have less intelligence than a dog or an ox, because like an infant born baby, at what point do you actually stand on your own 2 feet and govern your own life and outcome? And thus, at what stage do you become ultimately old enough and competent through any industrialized qualification, quantified against the masses and the statistics already at play, and play that major beneficiary of what the honorarian, be it the actual, the leaders and those governing us, entitle us or enrapture us in which to do. It isn't. It became the crutch. It's a crutch because, like a world constantly robbing itself and the pathway of righteousness, righteousness is more original than sin. And we're constantly telling children how they ought to live this life and take it on. It's like taking away from the children the concept in which actually might blow itself out into a much more grandeur, magnificent outcome, in opposed to the one that brought mankind to where we are, like planetarily, environmentally, to the brink of human annihilation. If we are mankind, it's like saying, well, we are a mankind. And God leaves nothing off limits to mankind's pious, pioneering imagination about heaven and earth. It's actually there for us to take and to imaginate, to help reconnect us or to simply connect us. That's where creation comes from, and that's where generation comes from. But you want to treat the whole world like a romance where we're all in bed with one another, to the point where even privacy takes it away from us. And you say industry heads love industry heads. Wine sippers love wine sippers. Droggos love droggos. Alcoholics love alcoholics. Music heads love music heads. People are forbidden. People are duped to believe that forbidden fruit tastes sweeter. Just like, private people love private people. It's forbidden to breach their privacy, but private people love private people. People are duped to believe that forbidden fruit tastes sweeter, or that the forbidden notion or the concepts in which castrate, to the degree of some kind of outcome, perpetuate as it never is, it has that malign difference or that malign indifference that correlates in perfect synchronism with the psychology or the psychological stronghold in which breaks down the deportmentalism. And like life is very much like this big earth, one big massive deportmentalization, where it gets carried and sifted through both countries and industries or society as a whole, like a bum bag in which people too somehow suffice that incentive, as intended as it most perfectly is or was, given it being both substantial or stipulated or substantiated in the rollout of that termed enrollment or, employment period, workplace enrollment, workplace practice. So, there's a lot of unemployed people. There's a lot of ugly and poor people, because it helps act like a light to shine through the fake facade of power and industry and privatization. It's not a myth, and it's not something that has always been just so thrashed through the airwaves and telecommunication broadcasting agencies and corporations, and through common civil discussion and conversation, that we're immune to it somehow. See, because crying helps people resonate. And there's nothing quite like the common Aussie battler or the workplace battler who struggles. Struggle doesn't have a specific dress code or a culture or a skin colour. It relates a lot to occupation and how in the work industries like the unions, the workplace unions, work unions, they cry a lot and they complain. And crying helps people resonate. Resonate helps give people a sense of history. Do you understand what I mean? Like resonating factors, crying actually helps formulate the basis of mood and temperances that safeguard the equanimity of any congressional freedom or outcome fortifiable in need or at the means and averages of rollout and determination in which for people to not just govern but capitalise and place provisions in order so that people can somehow sort of, live side by side and help grant it much more time in order to produce what it does. the world is a fraudulent affair, and yet willful as it never is seen. People are just much more willful than willing to do anything. People know what it's like. They don't necessarily love as much as they do, and yet people constantly act like they want peace. But then it's not very lovely to amputate somebody's leg if it means it buys them more time to give them life and save their life so that they can appreciate life. So people constantly go searching for peace like it's on the wrong side of love. Love is just as volatile as peace, if not, love is the most volatile thing in the world. Love is a high-powered pulse weapon. Love is a weapon of integration where nothing gets your heart racing a million miles an hour than having a fight or an argument with people who you love. And as volatile as that can be, the concept even derivates or steers people to think that they want peace. But then you're not necessarily in one piece, are you? So therefore, unless people really go back to life and what it is, it's not lovely to amputate certain binding issues, unreconcilable differences. And it doesn't keep you in one piece, but it buys you more time to save your life and to appreciate life and to do the best with what you got. If it wasn't the case, and of course, we will look at it as a blown predictor scale, because we'll constantly write and reinvent novels and stories in which, like a common congression, becomes a resonating factor throughout the entire society. It becomes like a cringe. It becomes a crutch. It becomes some kind of karma. And we lace each other with it. We lace our impulses. We stir each other up by ways of imagination and connecting that way. It acts like a sense of proprietary and history, so that we're much more readily able to pluck that and put it into the debate, put it into the realm of the debate and negotiations, rather than being able to, overcome that adversity, in which, of course, was always the premise scope of the formidable, is if life isn't traumatic enough and difficult as it is. Humans concentrate on what they have rather than what they really, truly, and orderly step into. People don't want to relive the horror days. People don't want the fucking wars again. People don't want to relive the days of Charles Manson and cult practices. People who just, even Charles Manson could not escape the God factor. Even Adolf Hitler thought he was freaking Satan. He actually said it that way. He thought he was Satan, doing Satan's work. So, at what point do you look at the great big challenges, fit as it always is, for whoever, because you're too busy even with a heart that pumps faith, telling us that we can do it. Whereas teaching is just telling people, and training is simply making them do it. So you'd like to think again that if you had any real power, these would have been solved years ago, because training would have made you do it. So you're not just so willing, you're very much willful above all things, and desperately wicked to hold on to your percentages, and like the powers, and like the people, and those prejudices all wrapped up in one. Where do you think it's supposed to put mankind, generation via generation? You'll get to a stage where, like the one we're in today, it will bottleneck our generations. And we look at it like a narrow path or a scary path in which to travel down in order to eventually somehow sort of come out in one piece. When it's a bit like a hollow cost, and like a tunnel, and like a scary fucking path or a tunnel. It becomes like the tunnel of love, man. You're in the tunnel of love. Because once you get into it, like the information technology heads, the IT heads, you'll give up a real job and take a pay cut just to be able to be part of a circle that earns less money, but just become much more severely up yourself. And you think that you're in the right industry, but then like the 21st century analysis or research to understand digital technology rollout, right? It would never suffice itself even in the groundwork of the basis of employees there currently, right now, from any vantage point to the next, to be able to look back in time and say, okay, well, this is what it had produced. All it actually did produce was undermine the worth and the value of each other, because it became much more like a race against time, that you were never stepping up to the plate. You never actually put yourself in the corridor. You were actually never at one stage on a platform, or had, put the made the foundation so very strong. All you actually did as a people for so many years, decades, or centuries, day in, week out, month in, year out, decade in, century out, was show yourselves and the wider universe of life forms that don't know you and only wish to communicate with you, how you can perfectly destroy yourself. That's the one thing you're perfectly guaranteed. You are the greatest mystery to each other. If it wasn't so much of a mystery to understand life forms in which supposedly, again, we don't know, but we'll even try to modify it in a blank space, and even in the industry, where heads like scientifics will only actually go after what's conscientiously put forward through utility and conduct rates of those, of what we put in front of ourselves. So it's rather disturbing to think that you can actually meet that communication. You are the biggest mystery. And yet, of course, if you don't realise that, like any sort of subject notoriety, it's only ever sort of, conspiring against us to think that we're actually becoming, that we're not entitled to be part of the problem, like we're all supposed to be on a need-to-know basis in the Western world or the world around us, or in private practice, private corporations, industry, don't we, whatever, when it actually means that we think that we're part of the biggest, problem solving, or that we're going to help sort of all help come together and solve that great big problem, just by being able to, I guess, talk to each other in a fantastic way, in which dominates human thinking to that basis of haste and weary, and that bug-bearing effect that even once it gets on you, it thrashes the hell out of your thinking, and you're forced to, in some subliminal fashion, just sort of nod your head, desperately wicked, to sort of nod your head and just agree, when you might even disagree, and you mightn't even know fully, you might not even be perfectly apprehensive or comprehensive of what you're actually nodding your head to in a subliminal fashion. You weren't designed to.